But what
Okay.
Yeah. I Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Patterson. My name is Lily Wiley Upshaw, and I'm chair. Oh. So I project really well, so I normally don't use the microphone. So my name is Lily Wiley Upshaw, and I'm chair of the Buffalo Niagara Freedom Station Coalition, and we're the not-for-profit organization that owns the Michigan Street Baptist Church, and we're also part of the Michigan Street African American Heritage Corridor Commission. And this is the first of our Black History Month programming that we're offering here in the Meriwether Library on Wednesday evenings. So I want to welcome you, and I also want to recognize our executive director of the Michigan Street Corridor, Terry Alford, from back there. Audrey Clark, I don't know your title, our curator of museums and projects. We also have Dr. Lillian Williams, who's a board member and chair of our Education Preservation Committee. So tonight, we have the distinct pleasure of welcoming retired Cornell professor Gerard to Buffalo. He's, as I said, our first presenter. He taught in the area of He taught in the area of Africana and Romance studies, specializing in 19th and 20th century Caribbean literatures and intellectual histories, theories of modernism and modernity in Latin America. His current research and teaching focus are on the subjectivity in slave narratives, slavery and philosophy, sugar production and the development of the modern transatlantic world, and processes of gendered radicalization. Oh, and I did not practice that word, so we're going to skip that. And he also has, in what we're going to be talking about tonight, his collaborative Underground Railroad research project, which entails field work and community engagement in central and western New York, and that is going to be the subject of a new book he's working on. So how did we make this connection? And let me tell you a little bit of backstory. So my oldest son is a junior at Cornell, and he took Professor Acton's course on Caribbean studies, really, not directly related to the Underground Railroad or slavery. And in the course, however, the professor shared with the students information about this collaborative Underground Railroad research project that's taking place in Ithaca with the St. James Church. And St. James Church is an AME church, the oldest AME church in the country. Zion AME Church, the oldest in the country, and has a very similar history to our own precious Michigan Street Baptist Church. It was a stop on the Underground Railroad. Harriet Tubman visited there, as well as Frederick Douglass. And Cornell University has engaged in this project, this relationship with the congregation that's still active at the church, to engage and inform so much about the Underground Railroad history in central New York, and they also are engaging and bringing the students into this process as well. The similarities are so great that I thought, just as the Underground Railroad was a stepping stone, a connection that brought people through this journey, this process, then we need to engage in the same kind of dialogue and work and partnership with St. James. And so I feel like in this room and in this space, this is our family, our community, all of us who love this history of Michigan Street, and some of you may be learning it for the first time, and that's why you're here tonight. But I hope that you will leave engaged in wanting to give a hand and help us as we work together as a community. And so I'm excited to hear how in Ithaca they've been able to do that at St. James, so that we may draw upon the knowledge, the expertise to continue our journey and build a bridge and connection to St. James and Michigan Street Baptist Church and the Michigan Street Corridor. Professor.
Thank you very much, Lily. Can you hear me? I think that this mic is on now. So it's a pleasure to be with you, and I want to thank you very much for being here. I want to thank the Michigan Street African American Heritage Corridor, as well as the Niagara Falls Underground Railroad Heritage Center that I visited today for the first time, the New York State Board of Historic Preservation, the Meriwether Library, and special thanks to Lily Wiley Upshur for arranging this visit. At first, it was just going to be one day to do this particular event, but then I said, no, I'm going to be here for 4 days. Just film my itinerary. And she did, and all I felt basically was a tremendous warmth and generosity from the community. So I'm here to learn, as well as to give you a sense of what we've been doing in Ithaca. And I say that as well, feeling honored for this particular invitation, and also humbled because you have such a wealth here, right, of information on abolitionism, women's suffrage, the Underground Railroad, the Erie Canal. You have that. You know, we're just a smaller town, and those 3 years during the pandemic were crucial for us because that's when everything took off. Because for me, what I did was I taught an underground...
Something went wrong. Please try again.
Sorry. What is that? Underground Railroad seminar. It was an undergraduate seminar. And what we would have students do is read the classic slave narratives, you know, and then also some histories of the Underground Railroad. And then we would take them to sites. Usually... Oh, okay.
There we go.
All right. Usually we would go to the St. James AME Zion Church, and what was just described is it was between 1833 and 1836 is when it was founded. 1836 was when it was done. And it is the oldest still running AME Zion Church in the world. It's also the first the structure is the first sort of original church structure in Ithaca itself, we believe. So all of that's very important, and they have formed the sort of centerpiece of what we're doing, you know, in all the projects that emerged. As I was saying, so I was just teaching the course for about 7 years, which involved taking students to the sites. And what always moved me was the extent to which they would do the reading and then begin to ask questions, imagine, right? So all of a sudden it became their project. And a teacher can ask for more, right? And so that was just, it remains at the heart of what we do. Give students, give people, the public enough information, take them to the site and have them imagine what the experience would have been like, either, you know, being on the Underground Railroad or helping someone on the Underground Railroad. What would that have been like, you know? So that's at the heart of it, and also what's at the heart of it, and that'll come up in the presentation as well. And this is, you know, thanks to my colleagues from archaeology. You know, they said, well, what is the story that St. James wants to tell about itself, right? And that became the umbrella. So everything that we do on our projects is to assist St. James to tell its story. Okay? I didn't have the capability to print, so I had to write notes. Do you remember that? And you'll have to forgive me from going in and out of this presentation. It's the PowerPoint, but I also want to, we have what is called the Underground Railroad Hub landing page. So what I'm going to be going to that page as well. And if you ever wanted to explore more about it, all you would have to look for is undergroundrailroadhub.net, right? And so you'll be able to visit what we've been able to do during those 3 years of the sort of the pandemic. Okay, let's start. I immediately wanted to go to this question of what do we mean by history, because it's both humbling and important when people come with questions, with facts, wanting to know more. That's to be respected. In other words, academic historians do the important work as well, but it's very moving to see citizens who come forward just wanting to know or wanting to write about this, right? So that has to be taken into consideration as well. County historians, town historians, and so on, that's their work, right? So they consider that's their responsibility. But when you have citizens who just have the fascination about this Underground Railroad come up and want to do that research, or may have known of a house that has a strange attic, or had a relative that lived in that house, all of those stories come together, right? And so what are the ways in which we can bring these together? So, I consider that phase one is that accumulation and documentation of facts. We will never have a full story. We never do have a full story generally, but it's even harder when the activity is clandestine, right? When it's against the law to help people on the Underground Railroad, especially after the Fugitive Slave Law of 1850, right? So then what we're left with is sometimes to think of rumors, oral histories, things that haven't been fully documented, but we need to take that into consideration as well, right? Because since it was against the law to be doing or helping anyone on the Underground Railroad or traveling on the Underground Railroad, then people were not likely to speak about it, right? And so having access to some of these histories passed down, these stories passed down, becomes important as well. Now, phase two is where I think we are after the 3 years of doing a lot of this public humanities work. And that is trying to invite the public to understand the dilemmas and debates that inform the period, thinking of it as a case study. And I have one to give you an example. Frederick Douglass, this is what he writes in his first narrative. He says, quote, "It is my opinion that thousands would escape slavery who now remain, but for the strong cords of affection that bind them to their friends. The thought of leaving my friends was decidedly the most painful thought with which I had to contend. The love of them was my tender point, and shook my decision more than all things else." What I think fascinating about this excerpt is, given a situation in which all the imagery is about shackles and bondage and so on, he uses a different kind of imagery, which is, he says that, that there's a cords of affection, strong cords of affection that bind him to his friends, right? And that being the reason why he would think twice. But he didn't. I mean, there was a point of no return and then he decided. But the point being that, that freedom seekers, right, are not just reacting spontaneously to oppression, right? That they're thinking about the ramifications of escape. If we understand escape to induce fear, but it's also an act of courage, right? But at the same time you leave, you have to think you're leaving behind friends. And sometimes, if you're lucky, if you have family in the vicinity, but then it's not lucky because you're leaving them behind as well. So that's why he's saying thousands more could flee, but they make the decision not to do that because they want to remain with friends, right? And those friendships, those networks, those ties become so important because what slavery does is systematically decimate families, right? So having this network of friends becomes very important. So that's to give you a sense, that's one example of a dilemma, of a debate that's internal for him. Should I leave? Should I stay? What happens, right? Same thing with Harriet Tubman when she, freedom is sweet is what she says, but then she misses her family and goes back in very heroic ways, right? So this idea of, this is not to take away the movement across and realizing that you're free, the elation that you feel in knowing that you're free, but at the same time then you have to think next, well, I'm here by myself, I don't have my family, it's bittersweet, right? And so we have to take that into consideration when we think about what's the internal debate that they have with themselves about striking out for freedom, right? So that's an example of trying to take people to understand that particular dilemma, okay? Phase 3, that's a harder one. That is to say, trying to connect the dilemmas and debates to contemporary ones. It would oblige us to think what sort of dilemma today would be sort of resembling Frederick Douglass's. If he were alive today, what sort of thing in terms of dilemmas would he be dealing with today? So that's the work that's still ahead of us, but basically I've thought of it as 3 phases. And so very important in doing the work is to think about interactivity, right? Because that allows the kind of instructive engagement with others, thinking of it as a mutual communication. The third one is the one that I've just mentioned, permitting visitors to engage with complex issues of the historical moment. That's where I have found I've had more success with students in the classroom. The dates are important, the facts are important, but trying to get them to that moment to understand what was the debate, what were the elements, what were the pros and cons of any decision being made, so to try to get them there. That's a way to approach history that's different from knowing the fact of this is what happened on that date. So that's where they get it. And so at this juncture, retired, now thinking of broader publics, the idea would be to think about that, how can we engage in those debates that are also meaningful for us today? So, and the students have said that they remember, the experience of going to the site and thinking about those dilemmas. What I'll do now is give you a sense of the projects we've done. The first one is a 3D model and virtual tour. It was perfect during the pandemic. This was the St. James, the Emmy Zion Church. And I was able to get some funding from the university, because that was, what I'm showing is the most expensive to the least expensive in terms of these projects. This one was quite expensive, you could see. What we did was we were in touch, and this came from the archaeologists. They already knew about this company called SciArc, and they're based in Oakland, California. And what they do is digital preservation of sites all over the world, and they've done over 200, but ours was the first that they did on the Underground Railroad. And so what it involves is they send a team, as you can see at the bottom there, they come for about 5 days, and they come with this LiDAR technology in which they're sort of recreating the space, right? And then they're able to create a 3D model from that, and then also a virtual tour. So this took quite a while, given not just the problem of the pandemic, but also just in terms of working with them to interpret everything that they've seen. So let me give you a sense of what that looks like, and this is where I take us out. This is the site I was telling you about, the Underground Railroad Hub. This is what we put together. All you do is add net to it, and you'll be able to visit these. And we just had to do it because all of a sudden the projects multiplied, and we just needed one landing page to bring them all together. So this was the landing page that we put together. It's a friend of mine there who I got a photographer to go out there. It had to be at dusk because that's when you're thinking of escaping at night, right? So it's that moment that we were able to capture. And so, so we have, this is the St. James 3D tour. What we're not going to do is go to the 3D. You can explore that on your own because I have a hard time, navigating. Sometimes in the navigation, I've gone like through the bottom of the floor into the, I just don't know how to control that. But the tour itself this is the one that
Welcome to St. James Emmy Zion Church. I am Pastor Terrence King, the pastor of this historic church and congregation, where we are known for the beacon of light that we are and will always be to the African American community. Stationed on the Underground Railroad and historic beyond decades and generations of persons before us, that have come through the doors of this wonderful and historic church. So please come in, enjoy what you're going to see, and experience the power, the richness, the history, the resilience, and the respect that is St. James AME Zion Church.
So usually with the AME Zion denomination, they're itinerant, but he pleaded to stay just to continue working on these projects. So they've allowed him to stay, but he's also doing a PhD in Syracuse on child development. That's his area. And so it's the kind of welcome that he gives to everyone in the church. And all of our projects would not have happened without the embrace, the open doors that St. James, gave to us to sort of work with them. Because usually with my course, what happened is we would go to the site and then somebody would give us sort of a history of the church, right? But then it just became much more, which included this. So,
Yes, this monument was dedicated.
He's a trustee of
to
the church.
Men who volunteered here at St. James African Methodist Zion Church. This monument is a testament to those who joined here to go into the Civil War to fight for the freedom of everybody. So we're fortunate to have him here. And there's 26 men who dedicated their lives to the cause. They were recruited and they went into Rikers Island, and from there the State Department sent them down into the South, mainly into South Carolina, Beaufort, South Carolina.
As the congregation grew,
I asked them for sound.
So the original function of this room is the original sanctuary of the church. Built in the early 1830s, it was where the African American community, both consisting of freed and unfreed slaves, could meet and join for worship or religious services and meetings. At the time of the inception of the sanctuary, in progression with the fact that it became so popular with the African American community, students who were members of Cornell University, who were African American, could not meet on the campus, so they chose the church and other various houses around the Ithaca community to collectively meet. And pivotal to this sanctuary, this place, this location, is the founders of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, who were members of Cornell, decided to turn their social study club into the first Greek-lettered African American fraternity in the world. And because of that meeting taking place here, it has been the catalyst and the catapult for what we now know as the National Panhellenic Council, which consists of a total of 9 fraternities and sororities of the Black and African American diaspora.
The oral history of this particular site is that some of the older members of the congregation recall that there was a spot that was covered up on the ground that was possibly a hiding site or entrance to a tunnel, which is one of the things that they thought about. So there's a great deal of interest, that what is actually there. So I think the importance of the site as well is to give this history something of a more comprehensive nature, because it's not documented. We were not supposed to know this is time, but still the congregation community members hold on to the idea that there was something there. Right? So I think that's very important.
Harriet Tubman to free the slaves. She was a very important person. And I learned about the hidden room we have here that hid slaves. And I probably would have done the same thing if I was back in the era. And there's a song that Harriet Tubman sang, and I didn't find out the meaning of the song until later on in life. So I'm just going to sing you one tune of it if you don't mind. It's called Wading in the Water. So basically talking about people wading in the water, and God's going to trouble the water. Trouble the water? What do you mean? Why are they wading in the swamps and stuff? There's snakes and pythons and alligators and all kind of barracudas. Why do they get free from slavery and survive? So as I got older, I connected them all. God must have troubled the water so that nothing would happen to them. So that's basically what happened. And I actually have a CD of the song I sang. I made a couple CDs. I don't know what I listened to. But the song went, wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water.
So this is to give you a sense of all the people who participated in this virtual tour. And what we didn't know is that SciArc organization who put this together, we were being watched by Google Arts and Culture. And so Google Arts and Culture asked SciArc to do an exhibition, 3 exhibitions on the experience of working with us. And what they liked was the fact that basically it's the congregation that's taking you on the tour and the church leadership. And there are just 2 of us, myself and the archaeologist as well, who talks about the site, right? So they liked that combination, that sort of community approach to this particular project. And then, so I think it was February last year that they put that, that's as much sort of dissemination of what we're doing that we've ever had through, so through Google, and it was something that just emerged, right? Now bear in mind, this might sound like there's a blueprint for all of this. There isn't, right? This all began to emerge spontaneously, organically, and we just worked with it. Right? Okay, so back to give you a sense of another project that we've done. This is a much more recent one. This is a much more recent one. And so without actually applying for the funds, a part of the university came and offered the funds for us to be able to put together a trail of the Underground Railroad for Ithaca, which has never been done before. And so you can see what the costs are there, but then it involved working with a company, Culture Connect, that works with governmental organizations, with large museums and so on. So we had to sit with them, well, virtually, right? Just thinking about how to pull together this particular project. And so this time we had about 3 researchers working on this from the community as well. And also there was a point where they said that I should be the voice, sort of, welcoming people, having them walk through the tour. And I said, no, not me. I knew of 2 retired Ithacans. They also had been alumni of Cornell, and I asked them to do the voice, and it was just magnificent what they were able to do. And you'll get a sense of that in a minute. Anything else about this? Here's the tour. And so you can do this with your phone or with an iPad, a tablet, right? Just go along the sites that are given here. And we have basically a map of what we did, right? So you actually begin and end with the St. James EME Zion Church. But we had people do research on these individual sites, right? And we were able to do some of this. And we have them listed here, the different sites as well. And I'd like you to listen to this one. I went out and did photographs of the particular sites. So it's all sort of a collective effort to pull together this. This is a site where, imagine what I do with the 3D model if I can't even control this, right? But I'll let you listen to Abe Lee. What is moving about this for us in the community is Abe, after he did this, about 2 weeks after, he suddenly passed away. So it's so meaningful to his family that his voice is here, right? And his wife also does other parts of this, and they're so respected in the community that, they were the perfect voices. And just listen to his voice that we had recorded here for this first paragraph.
Sims is hard-won life in Tompkins County. William Sims was born in the mid to late 1830s and enslaved at the Chestnut Hill Farm in Loudoun County, Virginia. In the winter of 1857, an Englishman visiting the farm informed Sims and others that the overseer planned to sell them farther south. On Saturday, 3rd, 1858, the start of a long Easter weekend, him and 7 others fled Chestnut Hill for the north. And the group traversed the Potomac, Catoctin Mountains, gullies, and the Susquehanna River over several weeks. Both being so exhausted by Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, that, he says in his own words, he had to crawl on his hands and knees to relieve his feet.
Yeah.
In Bingham.
So, sorry, the quality, I don't know why that is. On the real site, it's fine. I don't know why this is happening right now. And so that can give you a sense of what we're able to do just taking people to the sites. And what was great about this is that we had it tested extensively. So I got in touch with a lot of administrators on campus. So they had about 40 of them went out and did the testing of the trail for us and gave us feedback. And then on another occasion, about 60 faculty took their family and friends on this particular tour and gave us feedback. So that was really good because the word was out. Right? So that was what we were able to do. Now, a third, we'll be hearing more of Mr. Sims in a minute in one of the projects, but I think this is also a very interesting story of how that came about. So in my course, as I said, I would have the students read the classic slave narratives and read the histories of the Underground Railroad. And then in the last 3 to 4 years, I started to ask them to give them a different project besides doing the research. I asked them to write a fictional narrative of what it's like to be on the Underground Railroad or assisting on the Underground Railroad. So with those narratives, what we were able to do is to put it on a website that we call Voices on the Underground Railroad. Notice it's not of the Underground Railroad because they're not really from, but they're about the Underground Railroad. So that's the distinction there. So again, here's something with the pandemic. I was approached by the Milstein program at Cornell. It's the Milstein program in technology and humanity. And they were looking, it's a 4-year program where they're thinking about sort of the ethics of technology, things like that, and working with that. And so they needed a project for their first-year students. And so they approached me and said, we want to work with you. So they created this website. Later on, they brought in web designers to do this. But it was amazing to see the kind of work they were able to do with these 5-page fictions that the students wrote, right? You get a sense of that right now. Again, I apologize for going in and out like this, but they hired somebody with a drone to capture the sites. Then they also hired local actors to do the voices for what the students wrote. The one that I'm going to have you, and so there's a map that gives the different sites. This is all that we have right now. And so the William Henry Seward House, right, in Auburn, is one of these. And you can hear what the student did. Isn't that beautiful, what they were able to do? Takes you to the Seward House. And you can listen, get yourself into podcast mode, right, to the story.
Voices on the Underground Railroad, William and Frances Seward House. South Street, Auburn, New York.
Something's wrong with
From Frances Seward to her husband William Henry Seward, dated October 16, 1851, she writes, "Two fugitives have gone to Canada. One of them was our acquaintance John." This letter can be found in the Seward Family Digital Archive. It is accompanied by a note from the archive editors stating that the identity of the freedom seeker John is unknown to historians. The author of the following story has imagined John as a freedman living in New York for 7 years before being driven off to flight again with the passing of the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. In this scenario, his mother, wife, and children went ahead to make arrangements and then sent for John, who continued to work in New York until his family had settled in Canada. Upon passing through New York State, he stayed a night in the Seward home, where he was warmly welcomed by Frances Seward and her children. The two agreed to stay in contact as he worked to reunite with his family in Canada. Informed by archival research and local historical contexts, the voices you will hear imagine the correspondences that could have passed between them.
this graduate student wrote this.
October 24th, 1851. Mrs. Seward, God's grace, I can finally say I am no longer a fugitive. Much on my mind, much to attend to today, but I found a moment to send you a brief few lines. Writing with the happy news that we arrived last morning in Ontario. With much gratitude for your aid in helping me and my acquaintance in the final leg of our journey through New York. I would be pleased if you would pass out profound thanks to your family as well. Write to you about my journey now as a free man, living as God intended. To be staying with a lawyer in town who has helped many fugitives before me by offering shelter and helping them locate their families who have crossed prior. He kindly offered to post this letter to you. Anticipate I will not have a chance to write again for many days. Until then, may God bless you. Most obediently, John.
Thursday, October 30th, 1851. Dear John, I received your letter notifying me that you arrived in Canada on Monday. Happy I was to hear this news. I have prayed that you would have no more troubles on the perilous journey through New York. How was the late crossing? To find the port I suggested, or did you have to find another way across? And it was a cold and frightening journey, and I am thanking God that you have made it to the other side. You now stand on the ground of a nation that sees all men as God does, free and equal. I anxiously await word that you have made contact with your family. Please do write if you believe we could help in locating them. Mr. Seward has many connections across the border and a great number of friends. He is feeling quite well today and asked when we might have guests stay in the old kitchen again. Just yesterday she asked after you and the others as well. I was glad to share your happy news with her. She seemed to enjoy reading to you in the evening and bringing you vegetables from the kitchen upstairs. I was joyed to see her so active during your stay. Happy that you were able to move through Auburn safely despite the heightened agitation around the rescue of a man called Jerry from jail in Syracuse. We are all awaiting news on the trial over which Judge Conkling will preside. I have no great confidence in the judge, and it is said that the prosecution is holding firm. Still, I pray the judge treats the defendants favorably. May God protect you today and always. Respectfully, Frances Seward.
Thursday, November 20th, 1851. Dear Mrs. Seward, happy to receive a letter from you early last week. My work with the lawyer has kept me busy as we continue to search for my family. Grateful for your continued interest in my cause, and I received your letter with profound joy. Your warm hearth and gentle spirit were a bright moment in the dark and treacherous months of my flight. Having lived 7 years as a free man in New York City, it still troubles me. I may have been stolen back into slavery with the passing of the Fugitive Slave Act. For the colored population of America, it seems that freedom is still a dream never to be realized, cannot understand why a nation built under the grace of God can continue to operate with the devil's hand and not recognize the humanity in the wretched man upon whose backs and with whose hands this nation was most certainly built. I am very invested in the case of the rescue of the man Jerry from jail. What news of the trial? Hard for me to imagine that in an abolitionist state like New York, still deny this man's right to freedom. Queen Victoria, on whose soil I now stand free and unafraid. I have many friends who plan to leave New York as it becomes more and more dangerous for the colored man in the North. It is thanks to gentle folks like you that they have a chance at making it to freedom. We'll write again when I have more news of my family. Please keep us in your prayers, and may God bless you. Most obediently, John.
So this is an example.
Comments between Francis Seward and John was read by Jessica Ness
And Bertrand Odom Reed.
So
on the Underground Railroad.
Oops, sorry.
William and Francis Seward Howe.
So Bert, the male voice there, he's actually the director of our broadcasting studio, and so he did that work. He's from New Orleans originally, and he intentionally, tried to, make the accent a little bit more realistic in putting this together. So all of this was done on the basis of just finding in Francis Seward's correspondence that somebody by the name of John had passed through their house. So this is what she built out of this particular fragment. Okay. So we'll go on, to what has probably been one of the most visible of our projects. Was an archaeological dig. It didn't cost that much, really. We've done it for 3 years, and this is at the St. James AME Zion Church. The church congregation had said, okay, we think there's something in that corner over there that was a hiding spot. So what I did was I contacted Professor Larry Brown, who's a physicist up on campus, and he did a ground-penetrating radar scan and found some anomalies. This is just outside the church. So it was on that basis that the archaeologist said, we would like to do this dig, right? And that's how it began over 3 years ago. And so the dig takes place from mid-September to mid-November on Saturdays, and the excavation team consists of Cornell students. Now imagine that first dig, because some of these were new students to archaeology and had no experience doing a dig, so this became their experience because they couldn't go anywhere else, right? So this was their experience. And then the other half of each excavation team are students from the community. We try to get roughly between age 12 and 17 involved, and we just thought it was a fantastic opportunity for them to see history and science come together, right? We also gave each of them an excavation kit. When they left, they're part of the excavation, so they took that home. I've had stories from parents about what they've done in the backyards with the kits at their houses, but we're continuing to do this. This particular project, I would say, is the most successful. Why? Not only because of the visibility that it gave us, but the archaeology department now has 7 faculty members working on this, including 2 postdocs. It's so unheard of, to have one department working on this, but they recognized it as community archaeology, right? And so that became very important to them. So there was once that we said to the provost, why don't you come visit us one Saturday? He came, he went up the bell tower, and he came and said, we can support this. So we heard him, and we said, can you give us a postdoc, right? And so he eventually did, and he just renewed it for another 2 years. What it also means for them, what I mean by success, is now that they actually have a search for a faculty member who will work in this area. I love the title of the search. It's called An Archaeologist of Liberation, right? So that's who they're looking for right now. So that's what spells success for me, right? And just in terms of how it's brought their faculty to be working on this, but also thinking about the future in terms of community archaeology. So, and you can hear the story from them, from their words. I don't know why we're having the sound issue. I think it's because I'm so wired that I don't know what it is.
Historically, this church has been a stop on the Underground Railroad, and it has also been the community meeting spot of activists and abolitionists throughout the history of that season and that time.
What archaeology does is it slowly peels back the layers of time. So we start where we are today, and we go back slowly through the 20th century into the 19th century. And so it's no longer just telling the story of the Underground Railroad, but it really became more broadly encompassing about how we tell the story of this congregation and this church over the course of 150, 170 years here in Ithaca, and the role that the institution has played in making this town and this community.
What archaeology offers to the study of this period is a really up-close look at the practices of everyday life. And so, you can see here some of the artifacts we found so far include ceramics, some glass, iron nails. All of these artifacts are important because in one way or another, they can help us tell stories of everyday life at the church.
One of the things that's been inspiring about the project is the first time I took students to the site, they came out so full of curiosity and wonder, and it sort of sparked a kind of historical imagination.
There's something about kinesthetically being involved in certain things, moving and digging, and I think this excavation adds that other mode of learning. For St. James and Cornell to build that connection, that collaboration, here you now have the work beyond the pages of the book. It's about there, you can see all the trees. Yeah.
So it's not just that we're revealing the history of this community. I've actually met people that I never would have met if we didn't start this project. People come down the sidewalks and check in with us each week and see what else we found, and they've now become new associates and new friends.
When somebody finds something, we're all very supportive about it and sharing that we're trying to give each other that joy of finding something big.
I think that this is what's so particularly entrancing about archaeological research is that it doesn't just explore a community, it builds one at the same time.
So there's also a learning curve for us because, as I said, my area is the Caribbean. And then working with archaeologists, they have to take me to Home Depot to find the right shovels. They, as archaeologists who are presenting here, their field is the Bronze Age in Armenia. So they had to sort of, well, how do I talk about, American archaeology? So that's when they depended on their colleagues, right? And that's how it came together. But we all had learning curves, to deal with here. Great. So I'll be quick about this. The hub page, we've been going in and out, so I'm not going to talk about this very much except to say that, there came a point where we needed to put everything together on one site because it was just getting out of hand. And so we approached some local web design firms to be able to do that. And finally, the last project I'll show is the William Sims interactive map. And one of the points to be made here is serendipity, right? I didn't know that I would have a colleague from the English department send me a transcription of the story of somebody who had escaped from Virginia and then ended up living in Ithaca. The person who transcribed it was his great-grandfather. So he sent me the text the very semester I was teaching the Underground Railroad seminar. And I didn't know I was going to have a student from China who had never been in the States. He was a graduate student in architecture with a lot of technical skills, right? And so his project, he decided to create a map, an interactive map, following the trail from Virginia to Ithaca. And so this is to give you a sense of what it looks like. Now, the reason why this is important, it's because, sorry, oops. It's important because it's very difficult to find a site or to get a narrative with somebody who remembers the names of the places that they were traveling on. Because this is the first time they're coming into this region, right? And so to have the actual names of places was something that we were able to create that map from, right? And so I asked him to do this, and this is what he produced, right? So part of it has the transcription. He also gives a sense of, you notice the different colors of so some of them are imagined or possible routes, because a lot of this traces just in a straight line the names of the places, right? But we needed more. So there's a legend at the bottom there that tells you what's the main route, secondary route, optional routes, and so. And so he was able to do that. Then I had a couple of other students work with him to see what was available in terms of abolitionist activity going on, right? And also I said, well, it's all well and good to know the distance they traveled. What about the altitudes? So he put that in as well, just to give us a sense of how rough it is, because very often some of these walks from one to another was like 17 hours, just walking. And this was the person who said that he was crawling on, because his feet was so, injured by the whole thing. And then, so it eventually goes and takes us all the way up. But to be able to have this map and follow this route is so rare. And so it's actually one of our treasures on this landing page. And it turns out that William Sims settled in Ithaca, was a farmer. His land, the quality of the soil wasn't that great, but he was very resourceful. So every time that he heard about an animal that died on a farm, he'd go get it, boil it down, and then mix it with ash and put it into and his crops were fantastic, right? So, so just being resourceful in that sense. So this is one of our treasures as well, just to be able to have that document and do something like this with it, So anyway, so just looking, for example, at just a thought toward comparison between St. James AME Zion Church and also Michigan Street Baptist Church. Like us, you have a church that has a lot of research possibilities and activities. You have also sort of greater financial support than we do because we've had to cobble things together just to be able to do some of these projects. But also the church has to cobble money together. They're now in the sort of grant writing mode to be able to get money for insulation, for fireproofing, stuff like that. So you can plan in ways that we can't. Like I was telling you, a lot of this just emerged. We didn't have a blueprint, so we've just had to say, okay, these things are emerging. How do we work with communities? How do we work with people on campus to be able to do this? And we have similar challenges, right? Sort of the challenge of making more and more people aware of this history that's around us, right? So that becomes a challenge both for you and for us. And, you know, and my way to think about it is to try and be as interactive as possible, you know, in thinking about these dilemmas and so on, the debates and so on. And then, you know, we happen to have a strong campus community collaboration, right? I think that Cornell feels very good about the ability to have a kind of a relationship with the community in this particular sense, right? It's not perfect, but it's something. The church has made this possible by keeping its doors open to us, right? So now the other sort of team that's coming on are people from architecture working closely with the church, you know, so it just keeps growing. And I have just considered myself more of a convener of some of these, just making the connections with people. And, you know, hopefully what we'll be able to do is have conversations going on between, you know, the corridor here as well as St. James. We're much smaller, but that basically is what we've been able to do over the last 3 years. And I'll just end with these final observations. As I said, it took about 3 years, and the projects emerged organically. And then it's just the momentum. And once people know that you're doing this, it just keeps building, right? And so, you know, it's probably not satisfying for somebody to hear that you don't have a blueprint, right? But it's actually the goodwill of people coming forward, stepping forward, and that's how it's worked. And I think that's very important. And then exactly what my colleague, the archaeologist said, Adam Smith, that collective research projects create communities, right? So it's not just about the history, but the fact that you're doing this research with lots of other people, the creation of that community is important too. And it has been an overwhelmingly positive experience for us, you know, so. Well, that's all I have to share right now, and if there are any questions, I know I've gone on for a bit, but thank you for your attention. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Professor.
Yes.
You
Sorry.
said you've been doing this for 3 years.
Yes.
Has any of your colleagues, has the U.S. Department of Interior gotten in touch with you?
No.
The reason why I asked you that, some years ago, Interior's going to share the package with you.
Okay.
I was working for a local assemblyman, and we did some work on the corridor, but Governor Pataki signed a bill that made, and Terry will send it to you, the underground, they all connected. The Interior Department got in touch with him because they heard what we were doing. What they wanted to do was tie in the part from Ohio. Can you speak in the microphone? Oh, okay. Going back to what
It's on already.
Oh, okay. The Interior Department wanted to tie in the piece from Ohio coming all the way over to New York, Pennsylvania, and all of it together. And he was curious as to what we were doing. And like I said, the governor signed this legislation. In that legislation, there was a piece that all the schools in New York State were ordered to create sort of what you have about the Underground Railroad.
Right.
I don't think it really never happened, but it's in that legislation.
Yeah.
Terry's going to send you that package.
Okay, great.
So your colleagues can review it and maybe even go further in looking at contacting the U.S. Department of Interior, because they have extensive information.
Right.
Okay. That may add on to, or you guys can add what you've done to what they have.
Right. No, thank you for that. It's good to know that there's that effort as well. But again, the work has been, if I create a landing page with these projects, how can I get that out to the community, right? So I wrote to many teachers. I never heard back. You know, it doesn't mean that they're not using the material. My job was just to make the material available, you know. So I'm yet to find out how that's being used, but the work is to make this accessible, free, right? And one of the other projects that we have, again, a student approached me. She was teaching a course on a first-year writing seminar, and she just wanted to do something on the Underground Railroad. She focused on that, and then she worked with some of the archives that we have, again, free, you can get from Cornell, the Samuel J. May collection, which is a huge collection, Cornell was founded in 1865, and he in 1870 gave about 10,000 items. He was a Unitarian minister. He was part of the rescue Jerry at Syracuse. He was one of the ministers that broke Jerry out of jail. Also, Jermaine Logan was the other minister who helped break Jerry out of jail. So Samuel J. May gave that collection to Cornell. And so she was able to do exercises for the students, and it's all there, so that if any teacher wanted to use this material, here is a model for how it can happen. Again, I didn't plan that. She approached me with the idea, right? So that's what we have there. So in other words, my response to you is the effort for us is to make this available and see what we're able to do in terms of that outreach. You know, it's also good to have it from the top down, but then it also needs to happen, you know, at the community level, you know, in order for there to be just discussion, you know, about these projects. On the website, on the landing page, if you go to the About, there's an explanation of why we did this site, but it also gives you, we have a list of the county historians and the work that they have done, and we also have a list of some projects that they have done that have been specific to the Underground Railroad. Again, it's all about making this available for whoever wants to use it, because it's consistent with what we're trying to do. All I've done in my class is give the students the material, and they're the ones that come up with the questions. You know, so I'm hoping that that model just continues.
Tell your students, check with Columbia. They have a rare book part down there. They have loads of stuff.
Right.
The reason why I know this is a colleague of mine.
Yeah.
I went to school in New Orleans. He came up to New York several summers and did research at Columbia.
Right.
And then read book run.
Yeah.
After graduation, we graduated together.
Yeah.
They denied him to come up to do his graduate work. But he told me each summer, because I was a New York City person, so I was coming home. He was coming from New Orleans to New York, spending the summer, but he was doing his research. Yeah. And he said they had loads of material in Columbia, at Columbia, all about, and he was tracing from his roots in New Orleans all the way up. So that was his curiosity.
Right. No, that's very interesting. Yeah, good. Thank you.
Another question?
Okay.
No, okay. I just wanted to say it's good to see you again, and I enjoyed the presentation. One question, is the church still an active church, and if so, how many, maybe the congregation, what's about the size of the congregation?
Roughly 25 to 30 people.
25 to 30 people?
Yeah. You know, a far different scenario, you know, of a church sort of dwindling in terms of its congregation, you know, but they're still there. On certain dates, there are more people that come from the community, but it's not like every Sunday, right? But still they're there. And as I mentioned in the beginning, it's the oldest still running AME Zion church in the world. Because even though the denomination started in New York City, they changed buildings and so on, right? But the St. James, they're still there. They also last October, celebrated 190 years of existence, you know, and so the architects, you know, who are working now saying, well, what black space is that old in this country, right? That has been founded and sustained for 190 years, right? So it's a treasure. So if it weren't for this small congregation, we wouldn't have these projects. You know, so they were open to working with us, to collaborating, and a lot of this is mutually beneficial because yes, we want to do research, but we're interested in helping them tell their story, right? So I think we're very happy with the collaboration, I think, on both sides.
Okay, and the second part of that is there a separate oral history project as opposed to what's actually on your website where you have something?
There isn't an oral history project at this point. I approached the Cornell Library to see, because it's very often like this. I might speak to a particular audience. I've spoken to audiences elsewhere, and somebody comes up with their stories. And I have no place to keep those stories myself, right? So I asked the library if they could create some kind of receptacle that would, you know, if you could call in the story, write in the story, whatever. So they're so overwhelmed right now. So it's another project that needs funding and needs to happen, right? So it's very important. And I think where the scholarship is, it's also, the person I go to in terms of the history of the Underground Railroad is Eric Foner a lot, and the way that he describes the work. And he says that very often other people have been able to write about the Underground Railroad, but very often the black congregations kept quiet because, again, it was against the law, right? So they would not be talking about that openly. So we really do depend on what's passed on from generation to generation. And so when the congregation tells us, we think that's a hiding site there, we say, okay, we'll find out, right? And we did that, you know, so that it becomes very important to listen to their stories. And even if there is no tunnel there, the question is still important, because everywhere I go, people want to know, where's the tunnel, right?
Yeah.
Where is the tunnel? And it would be so difficult, it would attract so much attention if you were to build a tunnel. You might find hiding spaces, right? But no actual tunnel, right? You would need more money to be able to build a tunnel that would have long-lasting sort of durability to be able to find a tunnel now, right? But the question is still important, right? There were a group of people who came up, actually, a cycling club, the Major Taylor Cycling Club, about 200 of them came, and they did, again, they saw what we were doing with the excavation and it caught their attention, so they wanted to do a freedom ride. So it's an African-American, mostly African-American cycling club. A freedom ride from Ithaca to Auburn, where Harriet Tubman lived and worked, right? And so they did that. And so before they could ask me, they wanted to know, what did we find, right, in the excavation? And before I answered them, I said, well, what do you want us to find? And they said, hope and resistance. So I went back to the archaeologists and said, that's what you need to find, right? And so that's become very important for us to sort of respect those questions, you know, and it's an important metaphor because there is a quest to know something else. There is a quest to know that people just weren't like hiding, running sheep that they're not thinking about what they're doing, right? There's a complexity to that, and I think people want to know that. So that's where the question comes from, you know. Yeah, thank you.
John, just wait for the microphone. We have people online, so we have to use the microphone.
No.
I was curious about the population of Ithaca at the 1850s. Mm-hmm. Both the overall population and the African American population. And you mentioned William Sims made his home there.
Yes.
So I'm assuming there must have been a significant African American population for him to feel comfortable going into.
Mm-hmm. So one of the other projects that I didn't show is a project that was done by somebody, a master's student in archaeology, where he looked at Library of Congress, he looked at Ancestry.com, and he put together a website that looks at the black residents of Ithaca between 1820 and 1870, right? And it also has information there about what their professions were, where they came from, things like that. The interesting thing about where they came from is before the Civil War, most of them were saying they're from the New York area. Ask some of those same people after the Civil War, they said, no, Virginia. You know, so there were stories like that, but he was able to do an excellent job of giving us a sense of who they were, what they were doing, how many lived in a household, things like that. And so the numbers are there. I can't say it's a significant population, but definitely around St. James Church, yes, because people settled right there. It was very important to them. They're the ones that, as we understand, you know, the church is not the place necessarily you want to hide people for any length of time, right? Because that's the first place that people might look, if they had the political will in the region to want to look, right?
Well, was Sims a free man at that point, or was he still?
He was enslaved.
Okay.
And then ran away, right, when he settled into the Ithaca area.
So he was a fugitive, still a fugitive?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And so it's just important for us to see that there were people who felt comfortably enough to settle in the area, right? He has the figures on the website, so you would have to visit, to know the numbers. So I can't say it was a significant population, but the importance of St. James and the residents acting as intelligence, right, for who's coming into town, who's leaving town, that became part of what they were doing. That's part of the network, right? So getting people to the safe houses, right, was part of that intelligence work, right? Yeah, thanks.
And that parallels so much of what we know about Michigan Street, too. When we look at the congregation there, too, and the role that they played in Michigan. It was the same in terms of the intelligence and moving people along. And when new people came to the community, others knew to go get the trustees of Michigan Street because they could help them, because they knew of the activism of the people of the church.
Right, that's correct, And, imagine somebody coming into town. We have the case of a barber, African-American barber, who would notice people coming in and immediately take them to get all, tidied up. Because obviously they're looking like people who have crossed mountains, right? And so you have to be, and that's what a lot of the bounty hunters depended on, just being able to look at somebody and say, this person has escaped. And that if there's a bounty, they know that that's money, that's an economy, right? But in the case of the barbers, just sort of cleaning them up and getting them fresh clothes and sending them on, so they wouldn't be, sort of easily spotted, right? Or you have in Lewiston, not too far from here, there was a tailor who was an abolitionist, and what he would do is, as soon as bounty hunters came into town, he would befriend them and make them coats of the brightest colors possible. So the ingenuity of ordinary citizens taking those risks is what is so interesting, right? So because to help someone, you're already committing civil disobedience, right? And there are people who just in their conscience felt, no, this is wrong, we should be helping, but we're afraid to break the law, the fugitive slave law, right? So that again is that dilemma, right? They know it's wrong, right? But they don't want to break the law. So there were a lot of people like that. But then you had a farmer who had a barn, who had a hiding place, right? And that was enough, right? So it becomes very interesting to imagine those situations of who would help and why, yeah.
I have a question. My question is, or slash comment, is there any relation or any comparison of the AME Zion Church that was founded in 1836?
Yes.
This church. Is there any comparison to Mother Bethel, AME, that was founded in 1816, I believe, by Richard Allen and Absalom Jones?
Right.
Were they like together, because these are obviously the two oldest churches of people of African descent in the country? So did they like help each other anyway from people escaping slavery?
Yeah, I don't know officially of that kind of collaboration, but my instinct tells me yes, there was collaboration to be sort of exchanging information about the work that you're doing, because in the case of the AME Zion denomination, they were called the Freedom Church, right, during the 19th century. So having the conversations about abolitionism, about the Underground Railroad networks is something of common discussion, right? Especially when it's the congregations, the African American congregations that are helping. So it became something in common. But it's a kind of conversation that you keep undercover, right? Because of how dangerous it was. So I don't know of formal, but I can't see why there wouldn't be, And then you would have to think what would be the goal of that conversation, right? I think in terms of abolitionism, just to be thinking about the ways in which you want the abolitionist work. And by the way, the Underground Railroad was called practical abolition, right? So they would have conversations about practical abolition. But that again had to be clandestine, But I can't answer your question in terms of formal kind of conversations going on. But there would be a propensity toward having those kinds of conversation because they were involved in the same sort of project, right, of getting people north to freedom, or settling in where there could be safe settling into the communities, So, but thanks for the question, to think about it.
All right, good. And just one more.
Sure.
Can you briefly, explain our history of the Dred Scott decision, which is the Fugitive Slave Act?
Right, well, this comes afterwards, right, where imagine, I think one of the discussions, we're having this discussion last night, in fact. I've asked colleagues in the law school at Cornell, and says, okay, when somebody comes through the Underground Railroad, what is their status, right? What is their civic status, right? Obviously, because they're still considered property of the enslavers, you use terms like fugitive, right? In the South, they're understood as fugitives of labor, right? Or you think of them as runaways. But there's no term that talks about who they are after they escape, right? Because what they should be is citizen, right? And when you have a decision that says, no, they are not citizens, right? It leaves open the question, well then, what is the nature of their freedom? So that becomes an instance, that particular Dred Scott decision becomes an instance of a larger question of, who are these people if they are not citizens, right? They know who they are and what they've had to do to get where they are, right? But there was no sort of political name for them, right? And that becomes important when you have further discussions about equality, right? You still have names applied to you that say that you are somebody's property, right? You're not standing eye to eye with another free person who is not recently enslaved, So that becomes an instance of the country saying, no, they're not citizens. Then what are they? Yeah. So, good.
You have a question or comment?
Yeah. No question is too small. No question is too big. No question is too obvious. Yeah, that's what we say. But I have this joke too in terms of just thinking about my poor students, because we say, "What level are your students?" I say, "I don't care." They just get this material and they have to help me think through it because I don't have all the answers, right? So it doesn't matter if they're first-year students or if they're graduate students, they get the hardest stuff, right? And it's not because I'm wicked, it's just because it's hard, right? Like the dilemma I mentioned to you of Frederick Douglass saying, it wasn't so much for him, well, he had to decide, there's a point of no return where I'm fed up, I'm just going to strike out for freedom. So on the one hand, he has this, what's the point of no return? What's going to make me just leave, right? On the other hand, he's the tender point where he's thinking about his friends, and he has to be like that, right? But that just shows that he's a thinking, sensitive person, right? And not just an object, right? Who's just ready to run because he's being oppressed. So, and when he says there are thousands more who could escape, but who decide, right? It's not to say that they're masochistic, that they want to stay, but those ties are so important to them, right? That some people decide not to leave. It happened in Harriet Tubman's family as well. One of her, sister did not want to go because she had a child to take care of, So those moments become really important, Another significant moment of kind of a debate is when the Fugitive Slave Law passes in 1850, and William Henry Seward, who was governor of New York, senator of New York, secretary of state under Abraham Lincoln, his wife, he in his correspondence that, and saying that the Underground Railroad is working and it's actually their kitchen, right? So that's where some of the story comes from. But when that law passes and he says there's a higher law, right? And the Southern politicians, they got really nervous, like, this is a country that separates church and state, but he's saying there's a higher law. What does that mean? Right? Can you imagine that question today? Separation of church and state.
We wish they would.
Exactly. You know, so it becomes a moment to think some of these are not just a past moment, right? There are also issues that are ahead of us, right? So I think that's the importance of trying to make that connection in the third phase of what we mean by history that I mentioned, right? What are the, what are the things that we still see that are related to, those moments in our history? So, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, is the church open for public to go into?
Yes, it is.
Every day or weekends?
Definitely on the Sundays, but that could be arranged, just to be in touch with the church directly, The other day they told me somebody came in, they just came into the church, and they left a check, a big check, So those things, because this is a church that's just trying to cobble things together just to keep going. Like I said, there's no insulation, right? Fireproofing costs $100,000. Again, the congregation is between 25 and 30 people. They have an organ there that it will cost $40,000 to fix. So these are the issues that are ahead of them. But it's an amazing thing that they're still going, right? 190 years of existence. And that has to be honored and that has to be visited. So they would love visitors, So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So as I mentioned earlier, this is the first in our Black History Month talks here at the Merriweather. So next Wednesday, February 14th, our topic is, Audrey, what's our title? WBFO, Rhythms of Love and the Power of Music.
And the first 30 folks coming through the door gets free robes.
So that'll start at 6 p.m.
That's a good.
So thank you very much, and I hope again that this is just the beginning.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.